The obsidian doors of the Galactic Council chamber were more than mere architectural elements. They were a statement of power, a centuries-old barrier that had maintained the delicate balance of interstellar diplomacy. Forged from metamorphic alloys that could withstand the concentrated energy of a small star, they moved with a silent, almost sentient precision that spoke of advanced engineering and unspoken threat. When they began to open, the first sound was not visual but auditory, a vibration that seemed to originate from somewhere between physical sound and pure electromagnetic interference. It was a resonance that made the delicate sensory tendrils of the Xeran delegates curl inward and caused the crystalline communication devices of the Alpha Centauri representatives to flutter with momentary static. Captain Elena Rodriguez entered first, her stride defying every diplomatic protocol of measured movement. Each step was a controlled explosion of potential energy, her cybernetic eye sweeping the chamber with a predatory calculation that made seasoned galactic diplomats unconsciously lean back in their hovering ceremonial chairs. She wore no traditional diplomatic attire. Instead, her uniform was a tactical hybrid that seemed to shift and adapt with every movement, materials that looked simultaneously like advanced body armor and a finely tailored suit. To her right, Krazak of the Kravnar moved with a different kind of intensity. Where humans moved with calculated precision, the Kravnar warrior embodied motion itself. His exoskeleton wasn't just protection. It was a living system that seemed to breathe and pulse with each step. Electromagnetic currents danced along its surface, creating momentary fractal patterns that hurt to look at directly. His mere presence generated a field of barely contained energy that made the chamber's sophisticated environmental controls fluctuate. The council chamber itself was a marvel of galactic engineering, a perfect sphere suspended in a null-gravity field, its walls composed of adaptive metamaterials that could instantly transform to represent any known environment. Holographic representations of thousands of star systems hung in the air, a constant reminder of the vast diplomatic network these beings maintained. Normally, it was a space of measured conversation, of carefully modulated voices and intricate political dance. Today, everything changed. The first to react was Ambassador Zexril of the Xeran Concordat, a being composed of intricate neural networks that typically processed information with machine-like precision. For the first time in recorded galactic history, Zexril's neural patterns visibly fractured, a micro-expression of pure, unfiltered shock. Elena's cybernetic eye swept the room, its quantum-entangled sensors parsing information at speeds that made the Council's most advanced computers look like primitive calculating machines. She was analyzing not just the physical space, but the complex social dynamics, the unspoken tensions, the microsecond reactions of every delegate. Krazak didn't move so much as exist, a living weapon, a tactical system that happened to be sentient. His breathing created localized pressure variations that the chamber's sensors struggled to comprehend. Each exhale was a complex mathematical equation of potential violence, of survival refined to its purest form. The other delegates, representatives of civilizations that had maintained careful, sterile diplomatic relations for millennia, found themselves experiencing a sensation long forgotten in their carefully managed societies. Pure, unfiltered intimidation. No words had been spoken, no official declarations made, yet the entire nature of galactic diplomacy had already fundamentally changed. The Deathworld species had arrived. The holographic displays erupted to life, not with the clinical precision typical of galactic presentations, but with a raw, visceral intensity that made the council delegates instinctively recoil. This was no carefully curated historical narrative. This was survival made visible. Earth materialized first, a planet that looked less like a celestial body and more like a weapon of cosmic proportions. Volcanic eruptions painted the landscape in rivers of molten rage, while massive ice sheets collided with tectonic plates in a dance of perpetual destruction. The first images showed not civilization, but survival, proto-humans huddled in caves during nuclear winters, adapting to environments that would have obliterated lesser species in moments. Captain Rodriguez's voice cut through the visual chaos, each word a surgical instrument of explanation. Humanity didn't just survive, she stated, her cybernetic eye projecting additional data streams that danced around the main hologram. We transformed every challenge into an opportunity for evolution. The display shifted, showing rapid-fire sequences. An asteroid impact that would have ended most planetary histories became a catalyst for human technological innovation. Climate shifts that decimated entire ecosystems became proving grounds for adaptive technologies. Wars that would have destroyed other civilizations became crucibles of human ingenuity. Then the Kravenar homeworld materialized, and the very definition of hostile environment was rewritten. If Earth was a battlefield, the Kravenar planet was a sentient meat grinder of astronomical proportions. Perpetual electromagnetic storms created landscapes of living lightning. Acid rains that could dissolve most known materials fell in torrential waves, and the gravity was so intense that movement itself was a constant battle against total annihilation. Krazek's rumbling voice became a counterpoint to Rodriguez's precise narration. Where she used words, he used pure sensory data, memories encoded into living electromagnetic patterns that the holographic systems struggled to translate. The Council watched in horror and fascination as biological adaptations beyond their comprehension flickered into existence. Organisms that could regenerate entire body systems in seconds. Creature-machine hybrids that communicated through electrical discharges more complex than most species' entire communication networks. Life forms that didn't just survive in the most hostile environment imaginable. They turned that hostility into a form of art. Survival. Krazek's translation matrix interpreted his complex communication is not an achievement. It is the default state of existence. The holographic displays began to merge, Earth and the Kravenar homeworld overlapping, showing the parallel evolution of two species that defied every known principle of biological development. Humans had conquered their world through technological innovation, mental adaptability, and an almost pathological refusal to accept defeat. The Kravenar had become one with their environment, their biology so thoroughly adapted that the line between organism and environment ceased to exist. Ambassador Zexril, whose neural networks had processed millions of planetary histories, found its systems approaching total breakdown. These were not just origin stories. These were living proofs of a fundamental universal principle that the Galactic Council had forgotten. True intelligence is not about stability, but about constant, violent transformation. The data streams intensified. Geological time compressed into moments. Entire evolutionary paths became visible, not as linear progressions, but as explosive multidimensional bursts of adaptation. Humanity and the Kravenar were not just species. They were living philosophical statements about the nature of existence itself. No one in the council chamber breathed. No one moved. The origin stories of two Deathworld species hung in the air, a challenge, a revelation, and a promise of something entirely new. The diplomatic hearing transformed from a standard procedural event into a psychological warfare masterpiece that would be studied in galactic academies for generations. The first challenge came from the Protocols Subcommittee, a group of bureaucratic entities so ossified that their communication was less conversation and more an intricate dance of legal minutiae. Senior Adjudicator Ventok, a being composed of intersecting holographic legal matrices, produced a document that was less a set of regulations and more a weapon of administrative destruction. Species Classification Addendum 7 Gamma. Ventok intoned, his holographic form flickering with bureaucratic self-satisfaction, requires all emergent civilizations to demonstrate comprehensive cultural compatibility through a series of procedural evaluations. Captain Alina Rodriguez didn't even blink. Her cybernetic eye parsed the entire 2,347-page document in 0.03 seconds, identifying 417 procedural inconsistencies, 62 logical fallacies, and 3 fundamental breaches of interstellar legal precedent. When she spoke, it was with a precision that made legal algorithms weep. Objection. she stated, predicated on subsection 4.2, paragraph 9 of the Interstellar Diplomatic Covenant of 3712. Your current framework contradicts established precedent by a factor of 0.027%. The chamber went silent. Ventok's holographic form actually flickered, a micro-expression of pure computational shock. Krazak chose that moment to demonstrate a different approach. Where Rodriguez dismantled the argument through legal precision, the Kravnar warrior presented a negotiation technique that defied all known communication protocols. He simultaneously projected 17 different logical arguments, each building upon the last in a cascading wave of reasoning that created a three-dimensional logical construct. It wasn't just an argument. It was a living, breathing tactical system of communication. The translation matrices across the chamber began to overheat. Diplomatic interpreters, beings specifically engineered to handle complex interspecies communication, started to shut down, their systems unable to process the multi-dimensional reasoning. Ambassador Zexril of the Xeran Concordat watched in growing terror. These weren't just representatives of a new species. They were living tactical systems that viewed obstacles as raw material for innovation. The next challenge came from the Cultural Assimilation Committee, a group that had spent millennia carefully managing the introduction of new species into the galactic community. They produced a series of tests designed to evaluate diplomatic compatibility, cultural flexibility, and potential threat levels. Elena Rodriguez and Krazak looked at each other. For the briefest moment, something passed between them, a shared understanding that transcended verbal communication. Then they began to deconstruct the tests. Not just answer them, deconstruct them. Each test became a window into the fundamental nature of these Deathworld species. A psychological evaluation became a masterclass in adaptive thinking. A cultural compatibility assessment transformed into a dissertation on the nature of survival itself. The committee members, beings who had processed thousands of species' cultural profiles, found themselves experiencing something they had not felt in centuries: complete and total intellectual humiliation. No diplomatic protocol had prepared them for this. No established framework could contain the raw, transformative potential of these two species. The hearing was supposed to be a formality, a way to carefully manage the introduction of two potentially volatile civilizations. Instead, it was becoming something else entirely. A revolution. The technology presentation was less a demonstration and more a collective existential crisis for the Galactic Council. Captain Rodriguez's first projection appeared like a living, breathing ecosystem, adaptive nanotech that didn't just modify environments, but transformed them at a fundamental level. What began as a microscopic demonstration quickly expanded, filling the chamber with intricate, fractal representations of technological evolution. Adaptation is not a feature, she explained, her voice cutting through the holographic complexity. It's the primary operating system. The nanotech demonstration showed planetary reconstruction on a scale that defied comprehension. Entire ecosystems could be transformed in weeks, not through crude manipulation, but through a complex dialogue between technology and living systems. Barren worlds became living landscapes. Toxic environments were not just cleansed but reimagined. Krazak's technological presentation made Rodriguez look almost primitive by comparison. The Kravnar did not showcase technology. They were technology. His exoskeleton began to shift, not mechanically, but with the fluidity of living tissue. Electromagnetic currents danced along his form, creating intricate patterns that were simultaneously biological interface, communication system, and weaponry. The line between organism and machine didn't just blur, it ceased to exist. Holographic displays struggled to capture the complexity. Biomechanical interfaces that functioned like living organisms unfolded across the chamber. Entire civilization-scale entities that were simultaneously tool, weapon, transportation, and collective intelligence materialized before stunned delegates. A Xeran delegate fainted. An Alpha Centauri representative began spontaneously weeping. The temperature in the chamber dropped as the full implications sank in. These were not species that used technology. They were technological systems that happened to be sentient. Krazak's demonstration revealed biomechanical constructs that could regenerate entire systems in moments. A weapon that was also a communication device. A transportation system that was a living, thinking organism. Technological development that didn't follow linear progression, but existed as a constant, fluid state of transformation. Captain Rodriguez's nanotech showed planetary reconstruction. Krazak showed something more profound, the fundamental reimagining of what technology could be. The Council's most advanced technological experts found their understanding collapsing. These weren't incremental advances. This was a fundamental rewriting of technological potential. Ambassador Zexril's neural networks began to process the implications. Each new piece of information created exponential complexity. The traditional galactic understanding of technological development, carefully managed, incrementally advanced, shattered like fragile glass. Humanity's technology spoke of innovation, of human creativity transformed into physical potential. The Kravenar technology spoke of something deeper, a living system so advanced that the distinction between creator and creation became meaningless. A quantum computer materialized as part of Rodriguez's demonstration, not as a static device, but as a living, adaptive system that could reconfigure its own quantum states. Beside it, Krazak demonstrated a communication network that was simultaneously a weapon, a transportation system, and a collective intelligence. The Council members realized they were witnessing something beyond technological demonstration. This was a philosophical statement about the nature of intelligence itself. No one in the chamber breathed. No one moved. The very definition of technology was being rewritten before their eyes. The manufactured crisis materialized without warning. A holographic simulation designed to expose the weaknesses of the two Deathworld species. What the Council didn't understand was that weakness was a concept these species had long since transcended. The scenario unfolded with clinical precision, a multi-dimensional strategic problem that had historically defeated every species in galactic diplomatic history. A complex network of conflicting planetary interests, multiple potential intervention points, intricate political dynamics, and a countdown to total systemic collapse. It was the kind of scenario that had broken the most advanced diplomatic intelligences. Captain Elena Rodriguez's quantum-entangled cybernetic eye began to parse the information. What would take most strategic systems hours of calculation, she processed in microseconds. But this wasn't just computational power, it was something far more profound. Each potential solution became a living, breathing possibility, constantly evolving and reassessing. Beside her, Krazak's entire biological system was becoming the problem itself. The Kravenar warrior wasn't analyzing the scenario. He was transforming into a living computational matrix. Electromagnetic fields extended from his exoskeleton, creating complex probability waves that shifted the very nature of the simulation. Where most species would approach the problem linearly, Krazak approached it as a living, breathing ecosystem of potential solutions. The Council watched in growing terror. Rodriguez's solution came first, a strategic approach that defied every known principle of diplomatic intervention. She didn't just solve the problem. She rewrote the fundamental parameters of the conflict. Quantum-level negotiations that existed simultaneously across multiple potential outcomes. Each diplomatic move was not a single action, but a cascading wave of potential resolutions. Krazak's approach was simultaneously more brutal and more elegant. He didn't negotiate. He became the negotiation. His very biological presence created a field of potential outcomes so complex that traditional conflict resolution became meaningless. Diplomatic barriers dissolved. Potential conflict points transformed into collaborative systems. The simulation's computational framework began to break down. This wasn't solving a problem. This was a fundamental reimagining of problem-solving itself. The Council's most advanced strategic systems began to overheat. Translation matrices sparked and died. Diplomatic recording devices simply shut down, unable to process the level of complexity being generated. Ambassador Zixaril watched in horror and fascination as the entire understanding of strategic intervention collapsed. These weren't just species solving a problem. They were demonstrating a fundamental truth about intelligence that the galactic community had forgotten. Survival was not about maintaining systems. It was about constant, fearless transformation. As the final moments of the simulation approached, Rodriguez and Krazak moved with a synchronicity that defied individual agency. They were no longer two separate entities, but a living, breathing tactical system that saw conflict as raw material for creation. The simulation's final countdown began. Most species would have seen this as a moment of potential destruction. They saw it as an opportunity. When the final moment arrived, something extraordinary happened. The problem didn't just get solved. It ceased to exist as a problem at all. The council chamber went silent. The holographic displays flickered. The very air seemed to hold its breath. Something fundamental had changed. Cultural exchange was never meant to be like this. The moment the first cultural transmission began, the council realized they were witnessing something far beyond a simple diplomatic presentation. This was a fundamental assault on everything they understood about civilization, art, and collective existence. Human art materialized first, not as static images or carefully curated performances, but as living, breathing ecosystems of emotion and experience. Each piece was a direct confrontation with mortality, a scream of defiance against the void of existence. Paintings shifted and breathed. Musical compositions were living mathematical constructs that could reshape neural pathways, sculptures that were simultaneously historical record, emotional landscape, and predictive algorithm. A symphony created by a human artist was discovered to be a complex mathematical model that could predict potential societal developments. A seemingly abstract painting revealed itself to be a detailed strategic analysis of interspecies conflict, encoded in layers of color and form that could only be fully comprehended by minds capable of simultaneous multidimensional perception. Krazak's cultural transmission was even more incomprehensible. Where human culture was a dialogue with mortality, Kravnar culture was mortality itself. Their social structures were living, breathing networks that could instantaneously reorganize to meet any challenge. What other species would call art, they considered basic survival documentation. What might be interpreted as music was actually a complex communication system that transmitted entire civilizational memories in moments. A Kravnar song was revealed to be a complete genetic and societal memory transfer. What appeared to be abstract movement was a living tactical system of information exchange. Their entire cultural archive was a single, living, breathing organism that could adapt, transform, and survive. Ambassador Zexaril's neural networks began to overload. These weren't just cultures. They were living philosophical statements about the nature of existence. The human representatives demonstrated social structures that thrived on conflict and change. Their educational systems were not about maintaining knowledge, but about constant reinvention. A child's learning process was a complex adaptive system that transformed educational models in real time. Schools were not institutions, but living laboratories of constant evolution. The Kravnar social structure made quantum computing look like child's play. Their entire civilization was a single, breathing entity that could instantaneously reorganize to meet any challenge. Leadership was not a position, but a fluid state of collective intelligence. What other species would consider governance, they saw as a continuous process of collective survival. Most shocking was their approach to conflict. Where galactic civilizations saw conflict as something to be avoided, humans and Kravnar saw it as raw material for growth. Conflict was not destruction, but transformation. Every challenge was an opportunity for fundamental reimagining. The Council's cultural experts found themselves experiencing something they had not felt in millennia: pure, unfiltered intellectual terror. These weren't just alien cultures. They were living proof that stability was just another word for death. A human artist's presentation became a strategic analysis. A Kravnar communication burst became a complete civilizational memory transfer. Every cultural artifact was simultaneously art, weapon, communication, and evolutionary tool. As the transmissions continued, the line between culture, technology, communication, and survival became meaningless. The Galactic Council watched, transfixed. Something fundamental was changing. The fundamental challenge began not with words, but with silence. Captain Elena Rodriguez and Krazak stood at the center of the council chamber, their very presence a living critique of galactic civilization. The accumulated diplomatic protocols, carefully constructed over millennia, suddenly felt like fragile glass about to shatter. Elena's first statement was less a speech and more a surgical deconstruction of interstellar diplomacy. "Your civilization," she began, her cybernetic eye projecting holographic data streams that simultaneously analyzed and dismantled the Council's entire political framework, "is a monument to stagnation." Each word was a precision instrument. The holographic displays began to transform, revealing the hidden fractures in the galactic community's diplomatic and social structures. Centuries of carefully maintained balance appeared as a complex web of suppressed conflicts, managed extinctions, and institutionalized mediocrity. Krazak's contribution was more visceral. Where Rodriguez used words, he used pure information, electromagnetic pulses that carried entire philosophical constructs. His very presence began to destabilize the chamber's environmental systems, creating a physical manifestation of the intellectual assault. The Council's most senior representatives found themselves experiencing a collective moment of existential terror. These were not just critiques. This was a fundamental interrogation of what it meant to be an advanced civilization. Rodriguez's analysis revealed the true cost of the Council's stability. Entire species had been systematically marginalized. Technological innovations had been suppressed. Potential had been traded for predictability. What the galactic community celebrated as diplomatic excellence was nothing more than a sophisticated form of collective suffocation. Krasnar's perspective was even more brutal. He didn't just criticize the system. He demonstrated how it could be fundamentally transformed. Living data streams showed alternative governance models that were simultaneously more dynamic, more responsive, and more alive. Ambassador Zexeril's neural networks began to break down. The carefully constructed understanding of galactic civilization was being systematically deconstructed. The challenge was not political. It was philosophical. Humanity and the Kravnar were not asking to join the existing power structures. They were demonstrating why those structures were fundamentally obsolete. Every diplomatic norm was dismantled. Every established protocol was revealed as a complex mechanism of control rather than cooperation. The Council's most cherished principles became exhibits in a systemic failure of imagination. "Stability," Elena stated, her voice cutting through the chamber like a quantum scalpel, "is just another word for death." Krazak's electromagnetic field expanded, creating a living visualization of potential futures. Millions of potential galactic configurations danced around the chamber, each one more dynamic, more alive than the current system. The other species watched in a mixture of terror and desperate hope. This was more than a diplomatic hearing. This was a revolution. Not through violence, not through conquest, but through the simple, terrifying power of reimagining what was possible. The council chamber itself seemed to hold its breath. The adaptive metamaterial walls flickered, as if uncertain of their own existence. Holographic systems struggled to contain the sheer volume of transformative potential being unleashed. Something fundamental was changing. The universe would never be the same. The moment of transformation was not dramatic. It was subtle, profound. As the final diplomatic protocols dissolved, something extraordinary happened. The Galactic Council didn't just change, it was reborn. Captain Elena Rodriguez and Krazak stood at the epicenter of a fundamental reimagining of interstellar civilization. Trade became fluid, adaptive. Diplomatic relations transformed from rigid protocols into living, breathing networks of mutual growth. The rigid boundaries between species began to dissolve, replaced by a dynamic system of collaborative potential. Their first joint expedition launched, not as a military operation, not as a diplomatic mission, but as a living testament to what collaboration could truly mean. The vessel itself was a marvel that defied every existing technological paradigm. Part biological, part technological, it was simultaneously a transportation system, a research facility, and a living organism capable of adaptive exploration. Ambassador Zexril, whose neural networks had been fundamentally transformed by the encounter, watched the launch with a sense of wonder that bordered on religious revelation. The carefully managed universe of carefully controlled interactions was gone. Something alive had taken its place. The changes rippled across the galaxy with remarkable speed. Technological development was no longer a linear progression, but a dynamic, collaborative ecosystem. Species that had been marginalized for millennia found themselves at the center of innovation. Entire planetary systems that were once considered too hostile for habitation became proving grounds for extraordinary adaptations. Humanity's approach to problem-solving merged with the Kravnar's living system dynamics. Educational models were transformed. What was once a process of information transfer became a living, adaptive learning ecosystem. Children were no longer taught. They were invited into a continuous process of discovery and transformation. Governance models collapsed and were reborn. Leadership became a fluid state of collective intelligence rather than a fixed position of control. Political boundaries dissolved, replaced by dynamic networks of mutual growth and shared potential. The first wave of collaborative exploration began. Ships that were simultaneously research vessels, diplomatic platforms, and living organisms pushed into unexplored regions of space. Each mission was not just an expedition, but a living experiment in what civilization could become. Elena Rodriguez and Krazak became more than representatives. They were living symbols of a new way of existing. Their partnership transcended individual species, becoming a testament to the power of collaborative potential. Planets that were once considered uninhabitable became laboratories of extraordinary adaptation. Entire ecosystems were transformed, not through crude manipulation, but through a complex dialogue between technological innovation and living systems. The universe itself seemed to breathe differently. Where other species saw challenges, humans and Kravnar saw opportunities for transformation. Conflict was no longer something to be avoided, but raw material for growth. Every obstacle became a chance to reimagine what was possible. As the first joint human Kravnar research vessel disappeared into the depths of unexplored space, the remaining council members understood a fundamental truth. This was not a conquest. This was not an invasion. This was an invitation to something entirely new. The universe would never be the same.